Retro.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and whenever I'm in this part of the galaxy, I listen to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Makes flying a little more tolerable. Don't tell Anakin.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And in this episode, we are continuing our coverage with Maul with a look at the 5th and 6th episode of the season. I guess they actually like to call them chapters, but here we are. Before we get into that, Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Absolutely. Super easy to find us. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. And we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we'll be going over the 5th and 6th chapters I just mentioned. Chapter 5 is called Inquisition, and which is very apropos. And 6 is Night of the Hunted, also a very appropriate title. Let's just do our usual format here, Jay. Comes quick overall thoughts about these episodes, and non-spoiler alike before we get into the details.
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is for me anyways. I was saying last time that the series was really starting to click. Mm-hmm. Well, this is where it just went from awesome to what I feel like is essential Star Wars at this point. It's so good. There's so much emotional tension in this one. There's so much layering going on in addition to, the action that we get in both episodes 5 and 6. The action is incredible. The payoff is exactly what we were hoping for. And so I love that. And there was a couple of things in here that were kind of deep cut and rewarding in that way, but still keeping it simple enough that it doesn't have to be you have to know kind of thing. So I appreciated that as well. And we're going into some new territory too. So some familiar beats, but some very new territory in this one. So once again, they knocked it out of the park for me. But what do you think?
Oh, I continue to love this series. I've been hooked since the very first episode. I thought they've all been amazing, and these two are no exception to that. One of the things that I've heard discussion about, and I really stopped and thought about it while I was watching these episodes, is just that how engaging this all is, given the fact that we know Maul's fate, ultimate fate. We know that when he gets to Rebels at the end of season 2, that's the end of this character. Yet and I guess that shouldn't be a surprise because, we all know what happens to Obi-Wan Kenobi and we still loved him in the Clone Wars, right? And what actually happens to Anakin Skywalker, and we still loved him there as well. But just this was never intended to be the A-list character. Maul was a villain who did not survive the first movie of the saga, and then did come back and just captured everyone's imagination. But at the end, it's just like, where are we ultimately going with this? Well, we know where he ends up, but still, this is engaging, which I find to be remarkable. Also, the art and the animation style on this, every time I watch the episodes that drop on Monday, it just continues to impress me. When you look at Janix, if you look at like all the clouds that are in the sky, stuff, that it very much is that watercolor type of a style. The everyone is drawn in a less precise fashion. It's not as crisp as what you would have seen in the Bad Batch or the Clone Wars. But the style of the animation, the action is just, I keep thinking physics, like matter in a way that they don't in the other. They matter in the other animation series, but it's just so much more realistic looking in this show. And I think part of it is because a lot of the combat is much more close up. I think it's not, I'm having a hard time trying to figure out how to describe this, but yeah, there's some jump kicks and things like that. They're using the Force, which obviously we can't do and stuff, but they're just, the base of everything is so grounded in realism that it really, really impresses And I think the other thing is that one of the features of Star Wars animation has always been the lighting. They get the lighting right in a way that so many other animated series just could only dream to
Oh,
do.
yeah, that's
And
true.
this series is no exception, especially since so many of the saber fights, the illumination is like almost 100% just the lightsabers. And so you're getting the reds and the blues flashing back and forth and stuff like that. And so it's just really gripping the way it looks. And
Mhm.
that was one of the things that stood out to me this time.
Oh, yeah, it's gritty and it's rough around the edges, which is
Mhm.
exactly what fits the tone of the show, and it perfectly done because there is a lot of shadow and light, and that just goes to show that the name of the series does the lighting and animation justice, that's for sure.
Yeah. I also like the description that you gave it, the emotional tension here.
Mhm.
Tense is how I was thinking, especially of this first episode. We've got some minor betrayals going on. We've got characters that are still trying to figure things out, trying to figure out
Mhm.
how they're going to resolve it, trying to protect each other. So yeah, it's really, really full of that. Again, I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping up this non-spoiler portion, unless you got anything else you want to add to it real quick, just because I want to get into the details here, and it's hard to discuss without getting into what's actually happening.
No, let's jump right in.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's start off with chapter 5, which is called Inquisition. You want to go ahead and give us the summary?
I'd love to. The Empire has arrived. Lieutenant Blake leads the Imperial takeover of Janix and the search for Maul. However, an Inquisitor, Marrok, is also investigating the whereabouts of the former Sith. Devon and Master Daki avoid stormtroopers while looking for a place to hide. Unable to find his father, Riley contacts Lawson's estranged wife, a member of the Empire, for help, and she assures him that the Empire is there to keep them safe. After getting interrogated by Marrok, Lieutenant Blake releases Lawson, who returns home to find Devon and Daki with Riley.
Right. So, a fantastic episode. As I said just a moment ago, really, really, really tense. One of the things, and one of the reasons why I say that is that I'm thinking of the interaction between Two Boots and Lawson. Two
Mm-hmm.
Boots is convinced he did the right thing, and that Lawson is eventually going to come around to saying that this was the most efficient way of dealing with the problem they've got with Maul. And he just is so oblivious to the threat that the Empire poses to Janix and everything around them, and that it's not just a simple matter of protocol, that this was a bigger decision that needed more consideration. But he's just, his concern is that Lawson told me not to do this. I went over his head and did it anyway, so he's gonna be mad at me. And he doesn't get the bigger picture here. But what'd you think about kind of the tension between those two in this episode?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot more to be said about this, especially in episode 6 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for Two Boots, one of the things that I thought about for myself is would we be quite as empathetic and apologetic for him if he had a different type of voice or if he wasn't so endearing with those cutesy little boots of his?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the answer is probably no. If he was a little bit more of a brash kind of a character, even just in the voice, given that his intentions were still the same, that perhaps we would view him a little bit differently. And I think once again, that's the genius of how this series was created and approached, is that we do look at Two Boots and go, oh, but he didn't mean to dot dot dot, kind of
Right.
thing. And so he's almost like a little kid that has really good intentions. I think about kids when they are in their growth stages in their psychosocial development, and of course this goes back to me being a child development teacher once upon a time. But there's this kind of crisis that kids go through where they're looking at rule bound kind of things versus being able to step outside of the box, and it's all Eric Erickson stuff, but essentially he's looking at this like, no, this is the rules, this is how it is. And the fact that you said, well, you know director or Captain Lawson's going to be upset with me, that's his main thing, is that he wants to do right by him, but he also wants to follow the rules. So that's what's so endearing, I think, to him. But he's also valued, which
Mm-hmm.
is something that you don't get a lot of times in these industrial kind of droids, you know what I mean? So he's actually got a relationship with Lawson, and so that sets him apart as well.
Yes, and I think the first thing that you said about his voice and his mannerisms, making it easier for those of us in the audience to forgive him, is right on, because contrast him with Lieutenant Blake, the Imperial officer that's in charge of everything that's happening here on Janix. And he is another guy who is Imperial by the book, but he's mean, he's harsh, and he's condescending. And so we have no empathy for him by comparison. And, it just does helps that Two Boots, again, he's acting out of the best interest of Lawson and the people there on Janix, whereas Lieutenant Blake is acting. I put in the notes this kind of like the cruelty as a currency of the Empire, which is, we're here, we got a job to do, but that's not enough. I am going to throw my weight around, and I'm going to be cruel while I do it, and I'm going to be insulting, and I'm going to stick to Imperial policy and regulation to the nth degree, no matter what the repercussions are for this. And that's going to make me valuable in the eyes of the Empire here.
Yeah.
Contrast that again with Two Boots and then the police there on Janix. You've got Chief, what's her face? Kleiss, who's, she's upset that Two Boots went over Lawson's head. She doesn't like this either. She didn't want the Empire getting involved. She knows what that means for Janix, just like Lawson does. And so she's willing to play a little loose with the rules as it's needed, because it's necessary for efficient. You can't not be so bureaucratic and then expect harmony as a result. And so anyways, that's the contrast that stood out to me, was Two Boots on one side and Lieutenant Blake. And of course, there'll be more of that in the next episode when those two have a interaction as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Lieutenant Blake is more of a droid than Two Boots is in a lot of ways. And you nailed it when you said it's the institution and it's the hierarchy. And there's a lot more far-reaching implications to that than just this particular situation. For example, Marrok.
Yeah, but put a pin in him for just a second, because I think the other angle on this discussion we're having is Riley's mother. And when Riley can't find his father, he then tries to call his mom and leaves a whole bunch of messages, and she finally gets back to him. And she's like, what's going on? And then Riley goes like, well, the Empire's here. There's something big going on. Dad's in trouble. And her response simply is, well, if the stormtroopers are there, it's to keep everybody safe. So cooperate and everything will be just fine. What do you make of that? I mean, of that, there's obviously, getting back to that word that we started using, tension here. There's tension in this family between Banter Lawson and Riley's mother. Did she get a name? I don't think she's been named other than just being Riley's mother. And
I didn't catch it.
Right. And then there's Lawson doesn't like the Empire. She seems to think the Empire is just fine. It's nothing to be afraid of, that if you cooperate, everything will be good. And Riley's caught in the middle of all this. But what do you think about that?
I think about what Maul said to Devon when he said, "You've been indoctrinated." And so I'm wondering what the backstory is here behind Riley's mom, because there was obviously a reason why she felt so compelled to join the Empire as opposed to staying on Janix. And what was her reasoning for that? And so I think for her, just as we've seen in the past, there's things that happen that I believe she's pseudo aware of. She's kind of aware of with the Empire, but she doesn't see the day-to-day kind of, as you said, with the way that they treat people. And so I think that goes along with it. She doesn't see that. She doesn't see, as you said, cruelty as a currency. She doesn't see that aspect of things. She just sees it as order, and this is how things need to be. And if you just cooperate, things will be fine. And so again, like you were saying, contrasting that with what's going on Janix, it's very, again, institutionalized as opposed to human oriented, which is where I believe Janix is in this whole equation.
Yeah. I looked closely the second time I watched this episode to prepare for our discussion. I didn't notice like any rank insignia on her tunic. Lieutenant Blake, has his displaying right that. So she seems like she is an Imperial underling. I mean, technically Blake is too. That rank of lieutenant is not really high up the chain in the Empire there. And so I think you're onto something, that whatever it is that she's doing, whether it's, I'm thinking back to Cyril and Andor,
Oh yeah.
being, working in some sort of an office in a cubicle or whatever, and it's just this existence where he's seeing paperwork, but he's not really seeing, like as you just said, he's not seeing the day-to-day type of stuff. For her, it's whatever position that is, it's you're only going to be in trouble with the Empire if you have a reason to be in trouble with the Empire. If you're cooperating with the Empire, they're going to keep you safe, and can only be a good thing for you. And right, we'll get a little bit more exposition from Lawson in the second episode about his history with Rena and why those two have each other's back. And so he's got a bit more of a worldly perspective than she does.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as we've seen time and time again, too, the people that joined up with the Empire, especially at this stage, for the most part, just thought that they were doing something for the greater good. They didn't think that they were signing up for something that is, quote unquote, evil. She sees it as, this is the first galactic empire. It's, a safe and secure society. So, she's just kind of following that philosophy and that type of idea that this is what's going to provide structure. This is what is going to, help everyone to actually do better in their lives. And so I think that whatever it is, I would like to think that she joined up for those altruistic reasons as opposed to, something nefarious kind of thing.
No, I don't think she had a nefarious purpose, but I think Lawson is frustrated with her because she does not see what it is that the Empire is doing. She's only, she must only be getting the pristine, sanitized reports about what's going on. So one last thing from this area of the show before we move on to Marrok. It's just that I loved the bit at the beginning when we're in the police headquarters, and this is before Lieutenant Blake is showing up, but Chief Kleiss is talking to Lawson, and she's going on about how he's made a mess of things, but and he said, well, I'll take the blame for this. And she's like, oh, now you want my job too. And then she's like, we don't have anything to worry about. It's not like we're harboring Jedi. And just that like micro expression on Lawson's face, like, well, he doesn't tell her, but at any rate, that was a fun moment. Okay. Marrok. So, we know there's two Inquisitors in this series based off of the trailers we've received. And we get our first one here, and he gets a dialogue in this episode. We didn't hear him talk at all in Ahsoka, but here he is, and he's investigating everything that's going on. He does question Lawson, and in this case, he wants to know everything. We don't really hear much about that conversation. They cut away from it and then come back after it's all over. But he then goes out to Maul's old hideout and investigates what happens there, and discovers that we're not just dealing with Maul, we're dealing with someone else using lightsabers as well, because he seems to be engaging in some sort of version of Force psychomancy. And, as he's going over like the lightsaber scars that are in the walls and in the ground, whatever, and you can hear, and he's hearing the sounds of battle and screams and the like. Really fascinating use of this character, because he was really just kind of used in that same way we're talking about Maul in the Phantom Menace. He was kind of used as like an attack dog in Ahsoka. He didn't really get a whole lot else to do, but here he is being an Inquisitor. He's interrogating people. He's out finding out the truth about things. It is the very definition of the word of Inquisitor.
Yes, I have so much to say about this that we could do an entire episode just on my thoughts, but I'll try to keep it as concise as possible. So, first of all, I try to stay away from anything and everything before watching these. And I know that everybody has their different views of spoilers, and some people, as we were talking about with Alan, I don't want to give away that conversation, but some people like to be prepared. I, on the other hand, do not. So I knew that this episode being called the Inquisition, that we were going to see the Inquisitor. Honestly, I didn't think that when Marrok showed up behind um, behind Lawson, that it was actually going to be an Inquisitor. I figured they would maybe start with an ISB agent, but oh no, they went straight for the throat kind of thing. And the fact that there were scratch marks on the table where Kleiss had been interrogated before Lawson was just chilling. So to your point, as far as the way that they've treated this character and the way that they presented Marrok is, once again, I go back to my initial comment about being so layered. They've added so much more layering to not only this particular character and this particular Inquisitor, but I think just Inquisitors in general. Because you're right, Maul was an attack dog. And that's kind of where the Inquisitors are at this point. But it almost shows Maul in some ways what he could have turned into had he stayed with Palpatine, and not necessarily in a good way. So he would have been institutionalized. You know what I mean? He would have been used as a tool for Palpatine's bidding, because I don't know if he would have necessarily kept him around as his equal for too long of a time. It's almost like he would have become an Inquisitor. And not only that, but I don't know if you noticed how scuffed up and worn and lived in Marrok's armor looks, but of course I go to the costumes because that's just me. So we see so much more of a polished, pristine type of Inquisitor in things like the Kenobi series, for example, even in Rebels. So you see the fourth sister, the fifth brother. Marrok doesn't even have a number at this point, as far as I understand. He's just Marrok. So at this point in time, the Inquisitors are basically the Black Ops cleanup crew, as you said, the attack dogs kind of thing. Instead of later on when we see them in these hierarchical positions, vying for their ranking even before the Grand Inquisitor even existed. So I just thought that was so cool, and I loved that. And to your point about the psychometry, I thought that too, but then either it's not as deep as what someone like Quinlan Voss might have, for example, or in Jedi Fallen Order, Cal might have. It's more of an echo. And I think that's because Maul is so strong in the Force that he couldn't help but to leave such a strong Force echo. So I'm not completely sold on the psychometry thing yet, even though you know me, I love me some psychometry. That's my favorite force ability.
Yeah. Well, and I think for whatever reason, it worked best the way it was presented in this episode. Simply because I don't know. I think when you're playing a video game and Cal Kestis is using that ability and stuff like that, it's one thing where he can pause and listen to an entire conversation through touching an object here. But wandering around this hideout where there's just this huge battle and stuff like that. And I like your idea of the echo of what happened there with the blows. I think to me that just kind of made more sense. And perhaps he's just not as powerful with that ability as others are, but he recognized the saber marks there. And so it's not like he had to put a whole lot together, but it was just enough that he could brush up against those things. But it's also kind of just the style of the show, right? When we were just talking about in the last episode, Sam Witwer's screams being in Maul's saber blade, when he's swinging around in certain situations. So as much as we talk about the visual style, I think that's also part of the soundscape of this episode, is this type of this series, I should say, is this type of thing. So there's that as well. Okay. Devon and Daki. I think I've settled on calling Iko Dio Daki in this situation. Easier to say. Devon and Daki also kind of rolls off the tongue. But so they are right. They're trying to make their way out of Janix because obviously, they're Jedi. They're on the run. We see them multiple times trying to work their way through the city. They need to ideally get off world. But the beginning of this episode, you hear the announcements from the Empire about how all off world travel has been suspended. And and so the next idea is, well, let's get out of the city, and there's some ruins that we can go hide in, but they have to navigate around the stormtroopers. And so they'll be going down the street, they come around a corner and they see stormtroopers coming the opposite way. We see speeders getting stopped and identification being asked for. So that's, it's like the mega version of what happened in Mos Eisley back in A New Hope, right? And I want to see your identification is an even more fun instance of that.
Yes.
Well, actually, they do. He does use the mind trick. You've seen my identification. We can go. In this episode, it's hard to keep these two episodes straight because it's like they flow into each other so well. But at any rate, as this is happening, Devon is experiencing some depression here, and she's realizing what their existence is that they are going to always be on the run. They aren't going to be able to put down firm roots. They aren't going to be able to carry on their mission as Jedi as they knew it before Order 66. And she asks us, is this what our future holds? Always running and hiding. And I loved Daki's response to that. It's like, I hear your voice, but Maul's words. Mm-hmm. And then he goes on to comfort her later. It says, like, I've been around for a long time. I've seen a lot of things, but tyranny is always defeated. We must remain hopeful on this. So, anyway, what did you think about their interaction and just their involvement in this episode?
Well, you pulled out some fun things, and that Jedi mind trick was one of those nice little callback deep dive kind of things that I was talking about earlier. But also the fact that he said that I've been around for a long time and I've seen a lot of things. So it's very similar to the feeling that I get from Maz when she was telling that, she was telling her story and how long she's been around to see different things. And we were kind of theorizing about how long Daki's species is, what their longevity is. So I'm wondering if that's a little hint drop to maybe some things that either maybe not necessarily in this series, but we might get as a supplement or a support kind of thing in maybe comics or a tie-in book or something of that nature. But that Devon, as you said, she's getting to this point where she's seeing that a lot of the things that they're doing feel really futile. Mm-hmm. And she even goes so far as to say it's a waste of our abilities. And so once again, like you said, Daki was counseling her and saying, well, that is your voice, but Maul's words. And she says something to the effect of, well, he has a point. So, he's getting his little claws in there. And she even talks about making Maul an ally, almost the idea of we've said a bazillion times, the enemy of our enemy is our friend kind of thing. And Daki's just not having it. He said, no, that's just not the way it's going to be. And I don't remember if I think it was in the next episode. Yes, actually it was, where Daki frames the idea of Order 66, but he doesn't call it that. He calls it a Jedi purge. So it's because obviously they don't know that was the order that was given specifically. They just know what they dealt with and what the aftermath of it was.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I this is a great illustration of how Maul's playing this long game. And as you said, he's kind of sunk his teeth in a little bit. And the other thing that he says is that, or Daki says, is like, don't let him poison you. And that's exactly what seems to have happened, is that she's questioning all of this. She's still young. She has not had the long, fulfilling Jedi career that Daki has had. And as Maul pointed out in the previous episodes, your legacy, your destiny was stolen from you. Doesn't that make you angry? And yeah, it does make her angry, and she's not happy about this. And so she's looking for something better, and she's very tempted by this idea of the common enemy. So at any rate, it's just kind of brilliant the way that they've started showing this. I'm placing my money that it's ultimately going to work to some degree, that she is going to take up this ally, at least become some sort of an ally, but it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion at this point. You still got Daki whispering in her ear, her mentor, who she's very loyal to, and guiding her in this situation. But he's wandering around through these 2 episodes reacting to that injury he sustained in the previous episode. So is he ultimately going to fall out of the picture due to this injury or something else? And the next thing you know, she's left to make these decisions for herself, and without him being there in her ear to remind her of who they are and to offer that encouragement, will she be a little bit more susceptible to everything?
Right. And I thought about that too. That injury that Daki has is not, he's covering it very well, but I have a feeling that it's paining him a lot more so than he leads on. And, in a lot of ways, I hope that he doesn't end up passing away, because it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just me being a little cynical, but that just seems to be a kind of a common trope, oh, my master, my mentor has passed, and now, sigh, what do? I guess I'll go join this other guy, kind of thing. So I hope he stays in the picture, and I hope that he continues to be that pull to the light side, that Devon needs, because obviously she is being pulled to Maul in a lot of ways, but I think that conflict needs to be there. It needs to stay there. So,
well, yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I mean, my money is still on him not surviving to the end of the season here. And then ultimately, again, just like Ahsoka in the Clone Wars, when we first were introduced to her, it's like, wait a minute, Anakin had an apprentice. Where was she during Revenge of the Sith? And granted, it's a big galaxy, and we're not even talking about those saga characters here. But at the same time, it's just like, well, we never heard of these two in any story. We didn't, not in Rebels, not in the original trilogy, nothing. And so something has happened to them. What was it? Did they ultimately go into hiding? Did they perish during this entire conflict? What is going on? I mean, they seem to be a sub part of Maul's story, so I'm just not counting on them being around for the long haul. Potentially not even by the end of the season. We'll find out. But okay, let's talk about Maul real quick and then switch to the next episode. He's just not in this episode a whole lot. He is much more of a backseat player, and it's interesting because when we do see him for the first time, they're getting the spy bot report is relayed to Rook Cast, and then she is telling him that there's an Inquisitor. We should consider leaving, and his response is nope. And she's like, well, this is about that girl, isn't it? And he's like, yep, she could be a valuable apprentice. And what do you think about Rook's reaction? She seems like she's frustrated by this, but she's loyal to Maul. And then when she tells the other Mandalorians, they're getting a little cranky about things. They demonstrate themselves to be mercenaries, which is, as long as the credits are still flowing, we're good, but the credits aren't flowing right now. And she's just kind of tells them to shut up. But what do you think?
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, she's definitely loyal to Maul, and a lot of that, I think, goes with what else is she going to do? So what other option does she have? And obviously Maul is very powerful, even though she can see kind of that his folly of wanting this apprentice. I feel like that's kind of how she feels about it, like almost rolling her eyes, like, oh, this is one of those Force things, whatever, but he's kind of not led us wrong, so far. So, and what other options do I have? And so I think, as we all know, kind of Poodoo rolls downhill. So of course she's going to talk to the other Mandalorians in that way. And one of them's like, as long as the credits are still flowing, I'm okay. And it's like, well, I don't know about that,
Yeah.
So they're it's almost like it's funny because they're kind of their own little gang, which they are. They're a space gang. But Rook is kind of in the middle, trying to hold peace between everybody too. But she'll do whatever Maul wants. That's for sure.
I'm just wondering what the limit on that is.
Yeah.
At this point, it's the I'm not going to speculate, but she seems devoted to Maul, even if she's frustrated by this. But at some point, is the frustration of the other Mandalorians going to win over on this? Is she going to have to turn on the Mandalorians? Is she going to have to turn on Maul? Is she going to have to do something Maul doesn't want while still trying to remain loyal? Remains to be seen, but we'll find out. Okay, so this episode ends with, I love the beat when Lawson returns home and finds that Riley has taken in Daki and Devon, and he is not happy about this. But that gets us into Chapter 6, Night of the Hunted. You want to go ahead and give us the summary for that one?
Yeah, and one thing about that final scene is that when Lawson sees them there, he and Riley both take the same stance where they put one hand up and kind of rub the back of their neck. Like, oh my gosh. So, the whole apple doesn't fall far from the tree thing. I thought that was a nice little touch. All right. So, on to episode 6, Night of the Hunted. Here we go. Lawson is not pleased to find the Jedi hiding out in his apartment. And as he is convincing them to leave, Marrok arrives and the pursuit is on. They commandeer a gunship before attempting to escape through the train tunnels. And just when Marrok seems to get the upper hand on Devon, Maul intervenes, and together they fight off the Inquisitor.
Right. So we get a lot more Maul in this one. But everything starts off with him. He is, they're in their new hideout in the underworld, which looks like it's the remains of some sort of a landing strip of some sort, or like a landing platform is a better description. And he's pulled out his lightsaber and he's almost in a meditative state as he goes through forms. It doesn't necessarily do anything for the plot, but it is really cool for this character, I think, just watching him do that. And he goes through all of that until he gets interrupted by Rook with the images of Marrok and knowing that, he's been there at their old hideout. So, but anyways, I loved it. And I remember watching this as like, oh, Jay's going to think this is really cool.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes. I was just so impressed with the fact that obviously Maul is very skilled, but he's not above sharpening his skills. And that just shows his dedication to his form, his art form of lightsaber combat, which I'm kind of wondering exactly what he was polishing up on based on what we see later in the train scene. So I do have some thoughts about that as well in that instance. So yeah.
See, for me, it was just, practice makes perfect. Even a Jedi has to keep up on their skills. But much like the tea ceremony, we've discovered there's a certain amount of refinement to Maul.
Yes.
And to me, this was one of those moments. It was, yes, it's a little bit of practice, but it also kind of is, it's exercise. And we feel better after we exercise frequently for him. He's practicing breathing. He's concentrating on those forms. So I really like that for this character. Because as we've talked about in the last couple of episodes where we've discussed this series, this character has evolved from the attack dog that he was portrayed as in The Phantom Menace to who is someone who's intelligent, who is thoughtful, who is got a grander design, just like Palpatine does. And it's not all just, Maul see, Maul smash type of effect.
Right. Yes.
It's, he does lay down plans. He does have, again, that word refinement that I used. I see that in him with these moments that we've been getting in this series.
No, I agree. And he was probably testing out the work that I think it was Icarus that was patching him up, testing out his new gears and stuff too.
Yeah, good point. One of the other things that stood out to me in this episode is Riley's confusion about the Empire when there's this debate that he has with Lawson. He's Lawson too, Riley Lawson versus Brander Lawson, but with his dad. And there's this notion that the Jedi have to leave. Well, why do they have to leave? Because the Empire can't find them here. What's the big deal if the Empire finds them here? And Lawson's trying to point out to Riley's like, the Empire isn't what you think they are. And of course he's got this notion, well, my mom works for the Empire. How can they be that bad?
Right.
But it comes and smacks him in the face in a major way when Marrok shows up here. I felt bad for him in this situation. I mean, one moment he's showing off his room to the cute teenage Twi'lek, and the next he's got a Inquisitor barging through his front door.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's one of those with this particular episode, like I was saying at the very beginning, that there's a lot, again, very layered, so much emotional tension, and no one's really emotionally aligned at this point. So you've got Riley, who, as you pointed out, is being pulled between his loyalty to his mom and, oh, the Empire can't be that bad. And his dad saying, well, you don't know the Empire. Like, you have no idea what's going on here. He's, as he should be, a little naive to all of it. And so, as you said, he has the reality rug just kind of snapped right out from underneath his feet. And he's going to have to wake up in a big hurry and grow up in a big hurry too, unfortunately.
Yeah. What did you think about that moment where they're in the kitchen and Lawson wants to talk to Docky? And so basically it's Riley, go show Devon your room. And that just like annoyed sigh she lets out. And she's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
okay, come on, Devon, let's let the grown-ups talk. And this, that, the other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are you reading anything more into that beyond just a teenage, the world is so unfair, I should be able to sit here and listen to this type of thing, and now I have to go play in the other room with the other kids type of a situation, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that they couldn't just exclude Riley.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously it was the best thing to allow Riley to have a little bit of company in Devon. And Devon's frustration, I think, also comes from the fact that it's not just her age, but the fact that I've just been through a heck of a lot and I've just seen a heck of a lot and I can contribute to this conversation. But she was being respectful and she understood that, even though it was annoying to her and maybe she didn't agree with it, that Master Daki had a reason for it. And maybe it was better if she was out of this particular conversation, even though she didn't really like the idea of it.
Yeah, it was also kind of fun, just like looking at her and Riley in his room as they're comparing, contrasting their lives and their upbringing at this point. She didn't grow up playing games. She didn't grow up with parents and going to school, whatever. And Riley, in the meantime, is talking about his parents aren't really together right now, which is tough for him, and he stayed behind to play boatkin. Is that how you pronounced it? Was the sport that he's involved in? So he's got that going on, but just just a neat little moment there between the two of them before Marrok barges in and ruins
Hmm.
everything.
Yeah, it
Okay,
was very skeleton crew feeling, getting back to kind of just the wonderful part of childhood that we all love.
yeah, it was kind of more the high school version than the
Yeah,
elementary school or
right.
middle school version
Exactly.
we got in Skeleton Crew. Okay, so Marrok has done his inquisitorial duties and tracked the Jedi down to Lawson's apartment, and he barges in. The fight is on. Stormtroopers arrive. There's quite the pursuit. They get out onto the roof. It's funny to me, like how quickly Devon feels comfortable, like dishing it out to Lawson, because Daki sends her after them to look after the Lawsons, and she goes to the roof as the gunship shows up, and so she starts fighting it off, and then she yells over at Brander, is like, maybe the roof wasn't such a great idea, and then he just does not miss a beat. Maybe showing up at my apartment wasn't such a good idea,
Yeah, that was
but
great.
yeah, but it's I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's brash for a Jedi Padawan. I generally think of like Anakin kind of and Ahsoka having their personalities, but I don't know that I was seeing necessarily envisioned Ahsoka kind of talking back to Brander in that position. Definitely Anakin if he was there, but and maybe the clones, but I don't know. She seemed to be a little bit more respectful.
Yeah, well, I think that this is a different situation 100%.
Hmm.
Desperate times call for desperate measures kind of things. And yes, there is a certain protocol that goes along with being respectful of your elders, but that's been kind of thrown out the window at this point. And so her personality is, as we've seen, very much on the brash side. And so it's coming out in this, that's for sure, especially when your survival is at stake.
Right, right. And then she commandeers the LAAT gunship. That scene was so cool.
Yes.
The way she did that, jumping up on there, pulling the canopy off, throwing the pilot out, and then taking it over herself. I really dug that. And then the whole escape where Lawson's doing the backseat driving, which is
Hmm.
up, 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 and she's like, "Hey, you want to fly this thing?" And he's, "Yes, I do." But she manages to lose the first two gunships before the engine takes damage, and then the second two show up and cause her to do the crash landing there. But again, a lot of great Star Wars scenes come before this and make this one possible. But just the quality, I think, is unlike what we've seen in animation so far or
Oh
before.
yeah,
Mhm.
undeniably. And I love the fact that she was a little bit more on the, I wouldn't say humble side necessarily. He's like, "Have you flown one of these before?" She's like, "Well, kind of." And then she just sort of, just takes over and shows her skills. And that just goes to show that even Jedi Padawans are trained at such a level. And you've talked about, and we've both talked about the fact that these kids are prodigies. And so that's really shining here for sure.
Yeah. So in the middle of all of this, we get an opportunity to go back to the police headquarters, and Two Boots is still naive as to the scope of everything that's happened. And he's like, wow, the Empire is so generous. Look at how much resources they devoted to us that they're lending us. And this should be very efficient and things get cleaned up in no time. And then Lieutenant Blake is there like in a flash. And he goes on about I can't remember exactly what he says, but then he's like, Android, get rid of those boots. They're not regulation.
This is standard issue.
Yeah. And this is like also, and Two Boots is also talking about how Lawson is going to appreciate all the stuff that the Empire is doing right before his image shows up as wanted on the screens behind them. But it seemed to me that, and again, Two Boots has no facial expressions, but his reaction to Lieutenant Blake telling him to get rid of the boots is like the first crack in this facade he's built that the Empire is just benevolent and this can only be a good thing. And it just is kind of weird that that's what it took. Not Lawson getting into trouble, not Lawson being suspicious of them or anything else that the Empire had done. It was Blake telling him to get rid of his boots.
Oh, yeah. And that was like a gut punch to him. You said this is the first crack. And as you said, there's no facial expressions, but you could read it. You could see it. And all of the other droids that are like Two Boots, you could see them in standard formation and they're just kind of marching along behind the stormtroopers and they're just, in their own little parameter kind of things with their protocol. And then here's Two Boots, he, as we were saying before in the last episode, it's a completely different atmosphere on Janix than it is in the Empire. And so, this is, as you said, I think it's going to plant some doubt in Two Boots, obviously. I don't think he's going to flip overnight because he does trust the system and he clings to these rules because it's his protocol. But the Empire clearly doesn't value him like he's being valued here on Janix. And so, he might think to himself, well, if following rules still gets me put down or diminished, well, then maybe don't want to do this. He's getting the message that you have to erase yourself to belong here. And I don't know if Two Boots is going to stand for that.
Yeah. I mean, again, with Two Boots being so, this is the procedure. This is the way we're supposed to do things. This is the most efficient. The boots he wears flies completely in the face of that. That's part of his personality. The two big things that are non-standard about his personality are his fondness for Lawson. He was always bringing him coffee, looking after him. That's a very human trait. The fondness that he enjoys Lawson's company. He's even said so. It's like, no, I can't drink coffee, but I enjoy being with you. And so that's why he carries the coffee around. And, and now he's got these boots, which are a quirk there. And so it's kind of like almost like Lieutenant Blake said, you have to arrest and kill Lawson is I think it would have been in like an equivalent type of a statement to him that, that's a big deal. All right. I don't want to overstate it, but you get the idea.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right.
And quick aside, did you see how many empty cups of calf Lawson had on his desk?
Plenty.
And like they were all half drank.
Right. I also loved like at the end of the last episode, he was being released from right before he was getting released interrogation. He's like, can someone at least bring me a cup of calf? Because he's sitting in that room by himself. And then they do release him and he goes back to his desk and immediately picks up what I had to guess was a cold cup of calf.
Sure it was.
And then he like is drinking another one on his way home. and then he gets home and then there's yet another cup of calf. It's like 4 in real quick succession there. Okay. So they go to Rena's casino to try and get some help. We get a little bit of backstory on her there. And a lot of it comes in the, some of it comes from Devon and Riley talking about how they go way back. And then Lawson explains that, back in the day, before he was an officer, he was running around doing things, and Rena used to be a bounty hunter, and they got into a situation, and he would not be alive if it wasn't for her, and she wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for him. And so they've always kind of looked out for each other ever since then. And I thought that was cool because it just shows why someone like Rena, when this episode starts or when the scene starts, they're walking into the casino, and she is a like typical hostess of an establishment like that, bringing that one patron a drink who clearly recognizes Lawson and the fact that he's wanted, and seems like that must have been who turned them in there in the first place. But even when they're walking up to the casino, Lawson's like, yeah, I know someone who can help us, but she's not going to like it. And when they get in there, that proves to be true. She's like, what'd you do? And what is it you need this time? But she doesn't say no. She's like, I'll see what I can do under this. They're very devoted to each other, and we got just enough of the backstory that we can understand it.
Yes. And I me and my backstories, I absolutely love that. And I wonder if there wasn't any more than just saving each other's lives, because even Riley picks up on that. If you notice, when Lawson puts his hand on Rena's shoulder, and I don't know if maybe it's just Riley being a teenager and reading into things, but there are a couple of moments of pauses and where everyone pulls back on maybe something that could have been said, or how it was being said. So I'm wondering if that was something there too. And I have to say, so did you have anything else to say about that before I say what I have to say?
No, go ahead.
So I learned a new thing here recently, and I think that we have our first incident of what's called a glup shido in Star Wars in our Maul Shadow Lord series. Do you know what a glup shido is?
It's not ringing a bell.
Well, the only reason that I know this is thanks to Colby Wan, and I actually just learned this a few weeks ago, but it's basically a random background character who looks weirdly specific and important, but is never actually explained. They have a very distinct design, and they're placed with intention. So I think it's this little alien right at the very beginning that they see when they first walk in.
Yeah, the patron that I was talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
So I was just like, oh my gosh. And I even sent a picture of this alien to Colby, and I'm like, does this qualify? He goes, oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because she gets the calf or the drink or whatever it is, and she's all satisfied. And then when they all start to walk off with Rena, this alien, turns around and kind of gives them a sinister, knowing look. Like, and that's why I think that was the person that tipped off the Empire that these four were there.
Yeah,
in that situation.
I can see that. So I wondered if we're going to get more on this character. It'll be interesting to see if that happens or not. But there you go.
We'll find out. Okay, so the big moment in this episode is the train fight. So Devon and Riley get into the train station, and they're being pursued by Marrok. And then the train takes off, and the fight rages all over the back of the train. And just when Marrok has got Devon pinned down and demands to know where Maul is, you'll tell me. And then Maul's there, says, I'm right here. And he's been keeping eyes out for what's going on with Devon this entire time, and picked like the perfect moment to intervene. And so the fight is on. Devon and Maul versus the Inquisitor. And it ultimately ends when Devon severs the link between the two cars. And so they go sailing off, and the Inquisitor is left behind. And Maul turns to her and says, now you've seen the face of your true enemy here.
Yeah.
So great fight, and just another link in this, chain of events that Maul is pursuing to convince Devon to ally herself with him.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. This whole scene was so fantastic and so many levels. And I found myself saying holy poodoo quite a bit throughout some of these 2 episodes, but especially that shot when Maul is standing there looking down at Devon, and you see the tunnel lights behind him, almost kind of like hyperspace in a way. Holy cow. That was one of the best shots ever so far. But this whole fight scene, it was brilliant because it was just like the train. It was very linear and confined. and it was moving in a way that no one could control, whether they wanted to or not, and you couldn't stop what was coming. Devon couldn't avoid the fight. Maul can't retreat into shadow at this point, and Marrok has to confront them and not stalk them, kind of like he had been doing before. And I think this is where, as I was alluding to earlier, that maybe Maul was actually practicing some defensive forms of lightsaber combat because he typically doesn't have to do that. And so he thought, maybe I better brush up on this because I don't want to underestimate this Inquisitor. Plus, I need to protect Devon if I want her to be my apprentice. So if you notice, because I watched the scene like 3 times, I didn't watch the entire episode, just the scene. Maul is adapting. He's constantly repositioning himself in front of Devon. And what I thought was so cool about this was there's that one scene where, Marrok has the one side, and I have chills just talking about this. Can I just tell you? So he has the one side of his lightsaber lit, and then he lights the other side. And Maul's like, oh, I can do that too. And so he lights his side. And then you see them fighting from the side, and it's like this mirror image of each other. As I was saying earlier, Maul is confronting who he could have been if he would have stayed within the system. And I think that was so cool. And there were so many little micro choices that Maul was making at this point. And yeah, chef's kiss. So good. So good. Yeah. And I think Marrok realized that Maul's faster than he should be too. So there's that.
Well, one of the things that I loved about it was that when you mentioned that Maul ignites both of his blades and Marrok turns on like the cheater version of spinning the saber, right? I think that was Dave Filoni that once mentioned that with respect to Rebels, that they aren't as good as Maul, where he can spin that double-bladed lightsaber around real fast just based on natural talent with the Force and everything else. They have to, they go into cheater mode with that and let the blade do it for them there. Yeah, I mean, for me, I like your idea that this is what Maul could have been, but he was cast out on this by Palpatine. It was not so much that he chose to leave, but I do think there is something to that. If he had not been cast out, he may have been relegated to this type of position, but he's so much better than that. And the other thing that I loved about this fight was just like the chaos of being on the train. Devon lost her lightsaber like twice in the fight and had to call it back to herself and the Force. I also am wondering if once Maul showed up, she wasn't trying to show off a little bit for him, because I'm thinking of an instance where the Inquisitor got pushed back to the back of the car and she went charging forward by herself as opposed to letting Maul lead the charge in that part of the fight. And so again, when Maul was talking to her back in, I think it was episode 3, about, if you defeated me, wouldn't that impress your master type of a thing? Yeah. If she defeated the Inquisitor, wouldn't that have impressed Maul in this situation? And she still has these ideas that their common enemy is the Empire. She was just telling Daki about that in the past episode. And so, maybe I can show Maul that I am worth it here. And we could do something like he's talking about, maybe not, but the fight ends with the Inquisitor, and then she turns around and holds her saber up to Maul, like, I'm ready to take you on if that's what it's going to come to. But then he deactivates his blade and says, now you've seen the face of your true enemy, and then he leaves from there. So I don't know. I think we're running out of time, because otherwise we could probably spend another 30 or 40 minutes talking about this. But the fight was just absolutely brilliant. It said so much, and I'm really curious to see how it all plays out.
Oh, me too. And just the fact that, and I think you're right too, just really quickly, not to belabor the point, but I think that Devon was also feeling a little bolstered by Maul's power, knowing that she was fighting side by side with him. And so that she could let loose a little bit more with maybe some of her skills that maybe she didn't always use, or maybe because she never had to, kind of thing. Because how often do you fight someone truly on the opposite side of a lightsaber other than sparring? She's always had to fight the bad guys, so to speak. So I think there's something to be said about that too.
So this episode ends with Marrok having returned to the Star Destroyer and he begins a holo transmission. We only see a small portion of whoever it is he's talking to. And he basically says Maul is more powerful than we anticipated. And and then asks for instructions on that.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think he was talking to?
Oh, Palpatine. No, wait, it couldn't be. Well, yeah, I think it could be. Yeah, I think it was actually.
I think it was
Who do you
Vader.
think it was? Oh, that
Because
makes sense. Yeah.
The Inquisitors report to Vader, and he says "my lord," but that could have been Palpatine as well. I had been wondering if it was the Grand Inquisitor, but I don't know that he would have addressed the Grand Inquisitor as "my lord."
Yeah, I was just gonna say I don't even think, like I said, that hierarchy has even been established yet.
Well, I think it has, because I got the impression from Tales of the Empire. Was it Tales of the Empire, or which one was it that had Barra Sophie in it?
Yep.
That the Inquisitor was there. The Grand Inquisitor was there in those things. So I was assuming that hierarchy was already established at this point. But I still don't think he would address the Grand Inquisitor as "my lord." It would have been like Grand Inquisitor or something like that.
Yeah,
but
maybe Darth Vader is a better choice, because that makes sense. Although I guess Palpatine could be Lord as well.
Yeah, and either one of them, the title, like I said, the title works for either one of them. But and I'm going to be careful, because I don't want to set myself up for disappointment if it's not Vader. But that provides the opportunity for Vader and Maul to face off at some point in this series, if that is
that would
the
be
case.
So cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Something that's only been seen in like a What If comic from Legends has this opportunity if that happened. So we'll see. We'll see. I'd be really curious if that's where we end up going with this, and because Vader has a habit of showing up in everything at some point. So yeah,
can never get enough of Vader, though.
All right. Well, we will see. I don't know if it'll be next week. I mean, we got one more Inquisitor to show up too, so we'll find out. But all right. Well, then I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust on our discussion of Maul Shadow Lord chapters 5 and 6. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, we hope you consider subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already. You're listening to this, I assume you know how to do that, and we are available on pretty much every one of the platforms. If you want to check out more Podcast Stardust beyond what you can find on your podcatcher, head over to retrozap.com. Our entire back catalog of all previous 1,024 shows are there. And then we would love it if you could reach out to us on social media. And I'm going to get to some feedback here in just a second. But Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Yes, you can always reach us at Podcast Stardust on our Instagram and Facebook pages. And you can also check out all of our Pinterest boards, as well as subscribe to our 2 YouTube channels. So if you want to get even more access to Podcast Stardust, you can do that on the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. And if you would like to reach out to us via email, our email address is podcaststardust@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the show even further and pick up one of our Podcast Stardust pieces of swag, you can head over to TeePublic, and the link to that will be in our show notes. And we do have 7 different show logo designs available, so chances are you'll be able to find something you like.
Yeah. So this was fun. The crowd over at the BOGP, Beercast Podcast Discord, gave us a little bit of feedback. Marlessa asked me to tell you that she really loves your Sisyphus analogy for Maul.
So, nice.
Yeah. And then Trisha chimed in with, she'd heard, with the announcement about Celebration. She hadn't looked at the price of tickets, and she was absolutely aghast at the $1,200 price tag for the VIP tickets. But she's going to be happy with the basic ticket for a fraction of the price, which amen to that, Trisha. We're right there with you. And then Paul chimed in and said that he loved this week's episodes of Maul, and he also enjoyed the recap of episodes 3 and 4, and the fact that we gave Trisha a shout out, and he loved the Bane podcast as well. So
awesome.
Thank you all for the feedback. We do appreciate that. It's fun to know that people are getting something out of the show. We do it for fun, and we'd be doing this even if no one is listening, but it's nice to know that you all are enjoying it out there. So
yes, thank you so much to everyone who responded, and we always love to hear feedback, so please keep sending those in.
Okay, you want to remind everybody what you got going on in cosplay?
Sure. So over on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay, you can catch me as mainly Ahsoka right now, especially with the May the 4th holiday coming up here. I'll be posting some places where you can find me and things that I'm going to be up to. And you can also catch me as my fourth sister, Inquisitor. So you have to check that out as well. As my original concept Mandalorian, who knows? Maybe I could work as a mercenary for Darth Maul and some other fun things as well.
Okay, so upcoming on the show on Monday, we have a bit of a news episode. There's a few things that came out recently. We're recording these earlier than usual, so the news is not going to be as hearty as what we usually expect. But then on Wednesday, we are on Wednesday, Alan Voivod is rejoining us after he just did the Force Awakens segment to talk about his book Hyperspacing Hope. So make sure you all come back for that. It's a fun discussion. I can't wait to share it with y'all. With all that said, thanks for listening to episode 1025 of Podcast Stars, everyone. Have a great weekend. And until next time, may the Force be with you.